So my topic today in terms of align your will is from personal will to divine will. And today I'll be sharing a couple of Sri Aurobindo's earliest writings in which the transformation of personal will to divine will is contextualized within a broader framework of the overall aim or goal of integral yoga. About a year after leaving Alipur jail and having just arrived in Pondicherry, so this was around 1910, Sri Aurobindo scripted a text known as Yogic Sadhan, which was first published as a separate book under this title and is now part of Record of Yoga. And in Yogic Sadhan, it explores the critical role of divine will in the yogic process. And again, is Sri Aurobindo's first text on divine will or Shakti. So I will be sharing a few quotes from this script. And then several years later, 1913, he wrote the aphorism titled The Goal, which was published in Arya in 1915. And this aphorism, it not only details the sequence in his own spiritual awakening, but also speaks to the purification of the will. And with this aphorism, I'll be referring frequently to Mother's commentary on the goal, given nearly 45 years later in 1956. So let us begin with the first line of the goal. So when we have passed beyond knowings, says Sri Aurobindo, then we shall have knowledge. Reason was the helper, reason is the bar. Transform reason into ordered intuition. Let all thyself be light. This is thy goal. So here Sri Aurobindo begins with the purification of the mental consciousness whose knowings is through reason, but when purified, transforms into ordered intuition, which gives us access to true knowledge, knowledge with a capital K. And with true knowledge, all thyself becomes light. Reason was the helper, but at a certain stage of spiritual progress, he says reason is the bar. Why? Because the nature of the reasoning mind is to know through a process of comparing and contrasting, right? It breaks things down, it divides things up into individual parts and pieces so that we may know the thing objectively based on its differences. And this is why the mind discriminates, or the way the mind discriminates or deciphers between two or more things. And of course, it's not a particularly high or wide perspective of things. Its nature isn't to synthesize, it's not to harmonize or to even find the oneness in things, or to know something subjectively through identity, but rather to differentiate by breaking everything down into its individual parts and pieces. And of course, our knowings shifts with the wind, right? They're constantly changing. For example, knowing the difference between right or wrong, or what is moral or immoral, depends on our beliefs, our values, our mental preferences, and even our religious orientation. And these things constantly change as we go through life. They don't remain constant. So knowing through the lower mind is not only knowing through a divided mental consciousness, but also based on something that is not consistent nor orderly. But when the mental consciousness is purified, our knowings is replaced or enhanced through ordered intuition, says Sri Aurobindo, an intuition which provides access to true knowledge. And then darkness of ignorance vanishes, and only the light of a higher knowledge remains. So this term used by Sri Aurobindo is interesting, and ordered intuition. Later, the mother explains when commenting on this first line of the aphorism, she explains that when the mental consciousness begins to contact higher realms of knowledge, such as intuition, this contact is at first sporadic, right? It happens sort of in flashes. It's not methodical, it's not organized, nor is it something we have available at our will. But as this mental consciousness becomes purified, she says, it transforms into the very substance of this higher knowledge and light. It becomes a mind of light. Then true knowledge comes to us, not only in a methodical, organized way, but also exactly when we need it. It's not something which disappears and then appears, or it isn't there when we need it. It comes in a systematic, ordered manner rather than sporadic and not at the right time. So this is what the mother says Sri Aurobindo meant by ordered intuition. Transform reason into ordered intuition. Let all thyself be light. This is thy goal. And then the second line, when we have passed beyond willings, then we shall have power. Effort was the helper, effort is the bar. Transform effort into an easy and sovereign overflowing of the soul strength. Let all thyself be conscious force. This is thy goal. So first purification of the mind, and then Sri Aurobindo comes to the vital consciousness and true power. Now, power is not the exclusive domain of the vital consciousness. It's a force that is behind our thoughts and our emotions and our actions. In fact, it uses, right, the mind, the heart, and the body as its instruments. But we tend to think of power as particularly concentrated in the vital realm. Of the four powers of the mother, this is Mahakali, who is described by Sri Aurobindo as one who, quote, embodies the power of splendid strength, overwhelming will, and is a world-shaking force. Our willings, when unpurified, requires effort. But when transformed, this effort becomes an easy and sovereign overflowing of soul strength. And one has real power, right? Capital P. And all thyself becomes conscious force. Effort was the helper, and effort is the bar. So why? Because effort implies the existence of a counter or opposing force. Whenever there is effort, whenever we try to accomplish something or achieve something, there is always going to be a conflicting force that bumps up against ours, an opposing force, which therefore it requires effort on our part. It requires struggle when we try to exercise our individual willpower, our willings. And this is why our personal willpower will never be an easy or seamless or complete in its effectiveness. It will always require some level of effort on our part. At the same time of writing this aphorism, the goal, Sri Aurobindo wrote a second aphorism called The Chain. And here he addresses this issue of opposing forces that are inherent when we exercise our personal or individual willpower by using the analogy of many waves in an ocean. He says, man is in love with power. Therefore, he is subjected to weakness. For the world is a sea of waves of force that meet and continually fling themselves on each other. He who would ride on the quest of one wave must faint under the shock of hundreds. So our personal willings or willpower rides on the quest of one wave of force, but against hundreds of waves that fling their force at ours and at each other's. In his earliest writings on will, called Yogic Sadhan, Sri Aurobindo refers to the struggle and effort of the personal will required to produce an effect as cheshta, which he explains is actually a negation of divine will. He says when we exert our personal effort to produce an effect, we are in disbelief, or we are discrediting the divine will. We choose our own personal will, which is normally nothing more than a servant to the mind, heart, and body, over the will of the divine that uses the mind, heart, vital, and body as its servants or instruments. So purifying the willings of the vital consciousness, and one will possess power, the divine power, which he says here is an easy and sovereign overflowing soul strength. So easy, an effortless power, right? Overflowing without any limitations. An effortless power without any limitation that is complete and perfect in its action and in its command. Sovereign soul strength. This is the transformation of personal will to divine will. And notice that the light of knowledge consciousness or chit, comes together in this passage here with an effortless strength or force, right? Tapas or Shakti. Let all thyself be conscious force. So once the mental and vital consciousness has been purified, there remains only a single unifying conscious force at work, power working in unison with knowledge. And of course, in the supramental consciousness, the nature of power is effortless, right? It's easy. There's no division or fragmentation of power, and hence nothing that is contrary or opposing to the divine will. It's truly an executing power without any contradictions. So it's easy and it's reactionless because all is the divine Shakti. All is itself in the supramental consciousness. So there is no opposition, there is no effort. And the divine power, therefore, executes with perfect knowledge, ensuring its workings are complete and exact down to the tiniest, smallest detail. This is the power of the supramental consciousness, the divine will of the mother. It's effortless, it's reactionless, it's complete. And this is the divine will of the mother that manifested all these universes. And it's the same divine will of the mother which serves as the transformative agent in the process of conscious evolution we know as yoga. On this descent of the supramental power on earth, Sri Aurobindo says, the descent of the supramental means only that the power will be there in the earth consciousness as a living force, just as the thinking mental and the higher mental are already there. But an animal cannot take advantage of the presence of the thinking mental power, or an undeveloped man of the presence of a higher mental power. So too, everybody will not be able to take advantage of the presence of the supramental power. I have also often enough said that it will be at first for a few, not for the whole earth. Only then will be a growing influence of it on the earth. So Sri Aurobindo left his body in 1950 to work in the subtle plane for the descent of the supramental power on earth. And as we know, on February 29, 1956, the supramental force descended into the Earth's atmosphere. Mother called that day the day of the Lord. And because that force came into Earth and is growing in power, our call to the divine is more readily heard, and our prayers, so far not answered, are more readily answered. So let's go now to the third line of the goal, where he moves from knowledge and power to bliss. When we have passed beyond enjoyings, then we shall have bliss. Desire was the helper, desire is the bar. Transform enjoying into an even and objectiveless ecstasy. Let all thyself be bliss. This is thy goal. So purification of the mental and vital consciousness, then purification of the emotions of the heart, or what Sri Aurobindo calls the false or desire soul, whose enjoyings are the result of our desires. But when purified, he says, this desire transforms into an even and objectiveless ecstasy. We experience true bliss. We become bliss. Let all thyself be bliss. So desire was the helper, and desire is the bar. And this is because the heart can bring very positive and uplifting emotions of love, of hope, of happiness, of faith. But at least for most of us, these emotions are temporary states that fluctuate from one extreme to the other, from one day to the next. And the nature of the emotional heart and its desires, therefore, is one of polarity. We know that when we experience happiness, it will surely be followed by periods of sadness or unhappiness or even depression. If we are attracted to certain things, then we are always repelled by others. This is the nature of our emotions and the result of desires. And our desires are constantly seeking gratification through possession, right? They have this insatiable energy about them, which creates a perpetual sense of lacking or being without something, and thus the need for possession. But even after possession, right, the minute one desire is satisfied, well, another pops up. So our enjoyings aren't even. We don't experience a constant, a continuous, an even state of enjoyment. But Sri Aurobindo says, transform enjoyings into an even and objectiveless ecstasy. Let all thyself be bliss. So even and here objectiveless ecstasy. Mother explains the notion of objectiveless. She says that joy that comes from our enjoyings is dependent always on an outer object, an outer event, or an outer circumstance. And therefore, it's a joy which has an object and a cause. So this joy can come from a number of things, right? It could be a relationship that we're in, or beautiful music that we hear, or perhaps knowledge from a book or a class that brings a sense of joy, or any activity. But without that object or cause or activity, right, we would not experience joy. However, true bliss, referred to in this passage, is not only a constant, continuous, an even state of ecstasy, but also objectiveless. It's everywhere and it's in all things. True bliss doesn't depend on an outer object or outer circumstances or in someone else. It depends only upon our inner condition. And once we go behind our desires, we go deeper within, we discover an eternal, endless source of joy. Bliss comes from within, not from without. No object, no person, no situations required. It is without cause and independent of outer circumstances. So we need nothing whatsoever to be in an even and objectiveless ecstasy, this constant state of inner bliss referred to by Sri Aurobindo. But, says the mother, as with reason and effort, in order to come out of the state of the original inconscient, desire was indispensable. For without desire, she says, there would have been no awakening to activity. But once we are conscious, this very desire which helped us come out of the inconscience prevents us from liberating oneself from the bonds of matter and rising to a higher consciousness. In the aphorism of the chain, which was also written again at the same time as the goal, Sri Aurobindo says, man is in love with pleasure. Therefore, he must undergo the yoke of grief and pain. For unmixed delight is only for the free and passionless soul. But that which pursues after pleasure in man is a suffering and straining energy. And now to the fourth line in this aphorism, the goal. When we have passed beyond individualizing, then we shall be real persons. Ego is the helper, ego is the bar. Transform the divided individual into the world personality. Let all thyself be the divine. This is thy goal. So purification of the mind, of the will and emotions, and then purification of the ego. He says when we become a separate individual through the ego, but once the ego is purified, the separate individual transforms into the world personality, and all thyself becomes divine. Ego is the helper, ego is the bar. And so again, the mother says this too was indispensable, that in order to come to a higher plane, one must first exist. One must first be, and to exist, one must become a conscious, separate individual. And to become a conscious, separate individual, the ego is required, she says. Otherwise, one remains intermingled with everything that lies around us. But once the individuality is formed, if one wants to rise to a higher level and live a spiritual life, the ego must be surpassed to realize the true self, the capital S. And on this point, Sri Aurobindo states about the ego, the ego came there first as a means of the outer consciousness individualizing itself in the flux of nature. And secondly, as an incentive for tamasic animal man to act and get something done. Otherwise, he might merely have contented himself with food and sleep and done nothing else. With that incentive of ego, he began doing all sorts of things he might never otherwise have done. But now that he has to go higher, this ego comes badly in the way. So as he says, the ego is the helper, the ego is the bar. But when purified, this separated individual personality becomes aware of its world personality, or the realization of cosmic consciousness, a single, unified, undifferentiated consciousness which supports all the diversities, all the multiplicities that we see in life. And this is what Sri Aurobindo experienced in Alipur jail, just a year before writing this aphorism. Everywhere he looked, he said, there he saw Vasudeva, Narayana, the cosmic Godhead. The walls of the jail, he says, the branches of the tree in front of his cell, the doors and bars of his cell, the blankets given to him as a couch to sleep on, and the prisoners in the jail, the thieves, the murderers, the swindlers, he says. He says, as he looked at all of this, all he saw was Vasudeva. So with the realization of the cosmic consciousness, any sense of division, of separation and limitation disappears. The individual personality becomes a world personality, containing all others and intimately united and identified with all others. It's the realization of the oneness in all, the divine in all. This is the realization that makes us aware of our own divinity. Let all thyself be the divine. This is thy goal. So what's left after mental, vital, emotional, and ego consciousness and its purification? Well, the last and most difficult transformation, purification of the physical body, which is the final and ultimate goal of integral yoga. And it's the final goal in this particular aphorism written by Sri Aurobindo. And in this last line, it says, when we have passed beyond humanity, then we shall be the man. Animal is the helper, animal is the bar. Transform the animal into the driver of the herds. Let all thyself be Krishna. This is thy goal. So the animal was the helper, and the animal is the bar. Here, Mother explains why the animal nature was also indispensable. She says, for the ordinary elementary life of man, all the qualities belonging to the animal nature, especially those of the body, were indispensable. Otherwise, man would not have existed. The body was needed to house the mental, vital, emotional, and ego consciousness, and most importantly, the psychic being. So it was the helper, it was required. But our physical body is also what? It's a mass of ingrained habits and instincts, and it has a need for these mechanical routines, and it's driven by physical impulses, physical sensations, and all of this, right? The habits, the instincts, the mechanical routines, it causes the body to resist change. In fact, the body is the most resistant to change. And this is probably one of the reasons Sri Aurobindo sequences its purification lastly, and why many spiritual traditions, no doubt, in the East ignore the body altogether and sees it as a hindrance or obstacle on the spiritual path. Mother adds, all the needs of the physical body, such as the need for food, the need for sleep, the need for activity, indeed all that constitutes the animal part of the being, necessarily becomes a hindrance to progress and to the full liberation of the being. But when we have passed beyond humanity, Sri Aurobindo says, which is the previous realization, cosmic consciousness, then we shall be the man, right? Capital M. So let's see what Sri Aurobindo means by the man. And this was a third quote from a third aphorism, again written at about the same time that he wrote The Goal in the Chain. And this aphorism is called Man the Purusha. And here he defines the term man. He says, what do we mean by man? Man is an uncreated and indestructible soul that has housed itself in mind and body made of its own elements. Man is the Purusha and soul within. And in the very first chapter of Synthesis of Yoga, he defines again man. He says, man is precisely that term and symbol of a higher existence descended into the material world in which it is possible for the lower to transfigure itself and put on the nature of the higher, and the higher to reveal itself in the forms of the lower. And so just returning to this last line in the goal, transform the animal into the driver of the herds. Let all thyself be Krishna. This is thy goal. So this final and last aim is the realization of the Purusha, the psychic being, Krishna in the heart of every being. Not only are we one with the divine, with the realization of the cosmic consciousness, but we realize that there is a unique aspect or part of the divine, the psychic being within each of us. This is the realization of the psychic consciousness. And the final aim of integral yoga is for the psychic being to step forward as driver of the herds. Instead of the herds, right? And here he means by herds, the mind, the vital, the heart, and body, dominating and controlling the psychic being. The psychic being takes the reins and leads and governs the herds, takes possession of all our movements and guides and leads them in accordance with the divine truth. So no longer a silent observer or a servant to nature, the soul discovers its true nature, Ishvara. It is the Lord of nature. And so now I want to go back for a second and dwell more on this last line and refer to a passage in the very first writing that is scripted by Sri Aurobindo, Yogic Sadhan. And here he writes, step by step, he, the soul, becomes Shakshi, witness. And then he is Anumanta, the consenter, then the Bhokta, enjoyer, then the Bharta, supporter of nature, and ultimately he is Ishvara, the Lord of nature. So step by step, he becomes Shakshi, and Shakshi is the witnessing soul that stands back and witnesses nature's movements and realizes for the first time that it is separate from nature. But at the beginning, and this is why Sri Aurobindo says step by step, the soul isn't developed enough and instead is still fully encased in a veil of ignorance and darkness. It is, he says, Anisha. It's not the Lord. So when Sri Aurobindo is asked, well, how is it that Ishvara, the Lord of nature, becomes Anisha, a puppet, a servant to nature? How is it that the soul allows this to happen? And Sri Aurobindo answers, it was the inability of the soul to recognize his own true nature, position, and authority. He began by deeply interested being deeply interested in a small portion of his royal activity, the body. He thought, this is my kingdom. He became the tool, the servant of his bodily functions. And so too with the nervous, the sensational, the emotional, and the mental. He identifies himself with each of them. He forgets that he is different from them and much greater and stronger. But eventually, the soul grows and evolves to become the witness, Shakshi, separating itself for the first time from the field of nature. And then the time comes when the soul begins to sanction or refuse nature's movements. He is Anumanta, the consenter. And instead of standing back as a mere witness, the soul now sanctions the movements of nature. Yes, this. No, not this, right? It doesn't yet take full control of nature, but merely approves or disapproves of its movements. And this is kind of the inherent ability of the psychic consciousness, right? To know truth from falsehood. What is a right movement of nature? What is a wrong movement of nature? It's the ability of the psychic to truly discriminate between right and wrong, truth and falsehood. And what happens at this stage is that the soul, having separated itself from nature and then giving consent to its movements, it's developing a relationship with nature. As Shakshi, there's no relationship. It's just a witnessing pose, standing back. No interaction, no engagement, no sanction or refusal of nature's movements. But as Anumata, the soul begins to engage with nature. And because of this engagement with nature, the soul becomes the recipient of all that nature has to offer. As described in Savitri, drinking all experience like a strengthening wine. The soul, and no longer the false soul, is the enjoyer, the bhokta. But of course, it enjoys in a very different way than the false soul. It enjoys by drinking of the divine nectar, the divine element in everything, the soma hidden in all things, rather than enjoying through possession. And as the soul continues to grow and evolve, and its relationship with nature becomes even more intimate, it now not only partakes of the soma in nature, it begins to pour itself, its psychic consciousness, into the fields of nature, filling and fulfilling her. It becomes the Bharat, the guardian or husband, the supporter of nature, holding up her workings, giving to nature all its divine consciousness. And with the soul as her husband or supporter, in return, nature now gives freely of herself, and all her powers she places at the disposal of her Lord, Ishvara, driver of the herds, who lords over and supports all her movements in the process of evolution. Let all thyself be Krishna. This is thy goal. So again, as a second part of this aphorism, the goal, which is truly one of the most beautiful passages that I've ever read of Sri Aurobindo's, and has helped explain a whole lot to me in this process of researching and developing today's talk. This second part of the aphorism, which is also critical, Sri Aurobindo posits the question, well, what is there new to be accomplished? What have we yet to accomplish? And then he answers, our work is not to go on forever, repeating what man has already done, but to arrive at new realizations and undreamed of masteries. Time and soul and world are given to us for our field. Vision and hope and creative imagination stand for our prompters. Will and thought and labor are all effective instruments. What is there new that we have yet to accomplish? Love. for as yet we have only accomplished hatred and self-pleasing. Knowledge, for as yet we have only accomplished error and perception and conceiving. Bliss, for as yet we have only accomplished pleasure and pain and indifference. Power, for as yet we have only accomplished weakness and effort and a defeated victory. Life, for as yet we have only accomplished birth and growth and dying. And unity, for as yet we have only accomplished war and division. What is there new that we have yet to accomplish? In a word, Godhead. To remake ourselves in the divine image. So in closing, and before a short video, I'd like to read a passage from Savitri, Book 1, the Book of the Beginnings, Canto 4, The Secret Knowledge. The master of existence lurks in us and plays at hide and seek with his own force. In nature's instrument loiters secret God. The immanent lives in man as in his house. He has made the universe his pastimes filled, a vast gymnasium of his works of might. All-knowing, he accepts our darkened state. Divine, where shapes of animal or man. Eternal, he assents to fate and time. Immortal, dallies with mortality. The all-conscious ventured into ignorance. The all-blissful bore to be insensible. Incarnate in a world of strife and pain, he puts on joy and sorrow like a robe, and drinks experience like a strengthening wine. He whose transcendence rules the pregnant vast, prescient now dwells in our subliminal depths, a luminous individual power alone. So with this, what I'd like to, going to stop screen sharing here. And what I'd like to do is introduce a short film. This film I wanted to show because, you know, in our personal journey of purification, as Sri Aurobindo walks us through in this aphorism, and as the soul is stepping forward, this personal effort and personal willpower, as both Sri Aurobindo and the Mother says, it's an essential part of the awakening. It's the first part of the awakening. But eventually, this personal will must surrender to a higher force, the divine will. So how are we to surrender to the divine will of the mothers? Where do we begin? So gratitude is one way of surrendering to the divine will. When we are grateful, it widens our consciousness. It opens us up to something much larger, much more powerful than ourselves. And gratitude makes space for Mother's grace, right? Mother's grace to act in our life, despite our divided nature and our imperfections. Mother says, quote, of all the movements within the reach of human consciousness, gratitude is the one that draws you the most out of your ego. Then a great many barriers vanish instantly. The ego thinks of what it wants and has not. This is its constant preoccupation. The soul is aware of what it is given and lives in endless gratitude. So now I'd like to share this very beautiful film on gratitude that was created by 12 Qualities Art Studio in collaboration with La Grace Center, Vladimir Yatsenko, and Nodded, and with quotes from Sri Aurobindo and the Mother on gratitude. And are you able to show that, Vladimir?
I have become a foam-white sea of bliss. I am a curling wave of God's delight, a shapeless flow of happy, passionate light, a whirlpool of the streams of paradise. I am a cup of His felicities, a thunder blast of His golden ecstasy's might, a fire of joy upon creation's height. I am His rapture's wonderful abyss. I am drunken with the glory of the Lord. I am vanquished by the beauty of the unborn. I have looked alive upon the Eternal's face. My mind is cloven by His radiant sword. My heart by His beatific touch is torn. My life is a meteor dust of His flaming grace.
There is another movement which should constantly accompany devotion. That kind of sense of gratitude that the divine exists. That feeling of a marveling thankfulness which truly fills you with a sublime joy at the fact that the divine exists. That there is something in the universe which is the divine. That it is not just the monstrosity we see. That there is the divine. The divine exists. And each time that the least thing puts you either directly or indirectly in contact with this sublime reality of divine existence, the heart is filled with so intense, so marvelous a joy, such a gratitude as of all things has the most delightful taste. And yet, of all movements, the one that perhaps gives the most joy, an unalloyed joy untainted by egoism, is spontaneous gratitude. It is a very full joy, very full. It is something that widens you, that fills you, that is so fervent. It is directionless. To feel simply happy. To be quietly happy, a happy gratefulness, a loving recognition of the grace received from the divine, a humble recognition of all that the divine has done and is doing for you. Always joyfully accept what is given you by the divine. physically, materially, upon earth. It is in gratitude that one finds the source of the purest delight. It is very difficult to keep up your gratitude. For a time it comes very strongly, and again it goes back. The pure flame of gratefulness must always burn in our heart, warm, sweet and bright, to dissolve all egoism and all obscurity. The flame of gratefulness for the Supreme's grace, who leads the sadhak to his goal. And the more he is grateful, recognizes this action of the grace, and is thankful for it, the shorter is the way.
So as we conclude, let us just remain for a few moments with our eyes closed and feel this sense of gratitude, this sense of gratitude that fills your body, surrounds and embraces all your organs. Sensation of gratitude all through and in and around you. A gratitude that warms and opens the heart and feels the same deep and profound sense of gratitude in the mind. The awe and wonder of grace and beauty and love in your life and all around you in the simplest things. When we are grateful, we recognize the divine will, which orders and arranges all things as they are and should be, even when the individual parts are discordant. So just a few moments of silence, please. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Radhe, for your time, immense gratitude. And with this, we end day 2 of our 3-day program, Align Our Will, and tomorrow we meet at 9:30 a.m. So, thank you.
Thank you. Namaste.